Welcome to the Data Room, where we demystify go-to-market data for financially strategic execs. We deliver real-world guidance for finance and go-to-market teams, helping them collaborate to transform their data into a strategic asset. I'm Scott Stouffer, CEO and founder at Scale Matters. I've been a CEO for over 30 years at various tech and SaaS companies, and I've seen firsthand the power of using data and data modeling to understand what drives value creation in a business. Today's guest is CFO of Solutions by Text, Beth Deck. Beth has over 15 years of experience in the payments technology industry, and she spent a lot of time overseeing massive data transformation. So I'm sure her expertise will be high value here today. Beth, welcome to the Data Room.
Thank you so much, Scott. Great to be here.
I appreciate you joining us. Beth, I heard that you recently had a situation where two different groups within your organization were tasked with doing some type of data analysis, and they came back with wildly different answers. Can you walk me through that situation, what happened there, and sort of how you figured out what was going on?
So, just about everywhere that I've interacted with data, you end up in this place where you ask two groups the same question and get two wildly different answers. And the devil is in the fine print, it's in the details. Really basic KPI for a second. If we look at revenue per customer, that's something that almost everyone is curious about in their business. So the denominator of customer is really interesting. And what does an active customer mean? How are we counting customers? The question, did they have a transaction in the month, in the quarter, in the year? Is it that they have an active contract? Is it that they've ever had an active contract or account? Are they revenue active? Do we have revenue in the period of time? And so you can end up with very different counts. And so if your numerator is the same, revenue, and you're dividing by a different denominator, you can end up with really different answers.
That's interesting. In our business, we often talk to our customers about the importance of being very precise in the questions that you're asking, because without precision in the questions, it leaves a lot of room for what you're describing. Who was it you that had tasked these groups with doing this, or was somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, you're constantly going to be getting data questions and monitoring questions across the business. Any good, C-suite set of executives or team or the board are going to come with questions. And that's where we talk about, our tagline here at Solutions by Text is that good conversations pay off. It's important to really ask the follow-on question about why we're looking at something and what we're seeking to gain from it. How is it actionable? What's the outcome we're trying to drive together? Is it that we're simply curious about something and want to understand and move on? That's very rarely the case. Usually people are asking to drive a business outcome. And so you're going to spend time and have that whole good conversation where you deeply understand what's the point.
Our heritage at Scale Matters is in the RevOps world.
Hmm.
And, after having spent many hours building reports or dashboards that we thought were what people asked us specifically to do, and just to find out that it didn't meet the mark, we've become very good at asking the question behind the question 2, 3, 4 times, because otherwise there's just a lot of wasted energy. I understand that you have sort of this obsession, may be a little strong, but you can tell us, around the notion of clearly defined terms. Um, so how does that manifest itself in the way you do business, and does it have any ripple effects to
Yeah.
other parts of your business?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I would qualify myself as sort of data obsessed. I'm less scientific about it, perhaps, but I've had the great joy of managing a finance analytics team for almost a decade at the last place that I worked, and being at the early part of our, I call it democratization of data here at Solutions by Text. And and I'm a fiend because the question of how many is something I'm innately curious in. And then the attributes of that population of how many drive so many additional sort of ripple effects and follow-on conversation. Thinking back to the first question that I was talking about, revenue per customer. In addition to knowing the exact definition of an active customer, you also should understand attributes of that data that you might be doing follow-on analysis. What vintage? What type? industry, size of business. We talk about ICP, ideal customer profile, a fair bit, and understanding how ICP lines up against a customer population. What's the acquisition method? Are we direct to the customer? Are we in a reseller agreement? And then also understanding very, very basic characteristics, statistical characteristics about the KPI that you're measuring. Um, Median and mean go a long way to informing you about the analysis. And so asking all of those pertinent questions are really important because the answer of revenue per customer isn't particularly interesting on its own. It's the context around it that makes it actionable.
It's interesting. We use the term dimensional slicing in terms of that second level or third level analysis. And one of the things that we often see in the companies that we work with is that they've just never instrumented their environment to have that data enriched in such a way to even do that. They get to the point that they want to do that second or third level slicing and well, we don't have the data to do that. How often have you seen that? Why do you think that happens so often? And how do you think companies can get better at sort of pre-designing or pre-thinking about what they might wanna, do or from an analytical perspective so that they actually can build that enrichment up front?
I think it's interesting because your investment is only going to be to the extent that you feel that you're getting returns. Generally, we're all here to make sort of good, profitable decisions. Assuming we're in a for-profit business, of course. When I think about right sizing and staging, it's a little bit about the company's journey. When I think about very early stage companies, they might be in a very, very specific niche vertical, with very, very specific solutions for that type of customer. Until you have a broader customer base, those attributes aren't important. But as your business is getting, somewhat ironically, scale matters. As your business is increasing in scale, asking questions about the data attributes you need to be tracking and defining are really important. And then on those data definitions, spending quality time on the data definitions to have a deep, well-documented understanding is important. It's one of those, I think it's measured twice, cut once. If you're spending time on the definition, then the actual gathering of the data is going to be, an easier process with possibly much lower investment because you won't have stop starts.
That's interesting, and I think appropriate that you say it needs to be sort of relevant to the stage that a company's at or maybe the complexity of their business. From an organizational perspective, you're the CFO, obviously, with your attention to data. You're what I would call a strategic CFO versus maybe someone with a CFO title that's more of a accounting bend to their energies. Without a strategic CFO, who in the company would you expect at any 20 to $50 million business to be the one to sort of steward this concept around data and making sure that we do have the appropriate enrichment for our stage and complexity of our business, et cetera?
I think whoever is in charge of doing the reporting of the data, likely up to the board, is going to probably end up with that responsibility. In an ideal world, though, in my view, it's not one person. It's going to be multiple people. We are all stewards. When I think about the executive teams I've been a part of, we're all stewards of our business, and we need to function together as a team. That means that probably IT is going to own some aspect of it: data collection, availability, readiness. Whether it's in a data lake or an well-architected database, is important to think about. IT usually ends up with that responsibility. Around the definitions of data, I came from accounting and audit, so it's been interesting to listen to a couple of your podcasts and think about often controllers grow into early stage CFOs. Accounting I enjoy because it's the language of business, and the answer how many is answered in accounting a lot of times So accountants and auditors often have great documentation skill sets to help document that data dictionary clearly in a way that's shareable internal to an organization. So I think data definition keeper is another key role associated with data, so that you have good hygiene over time. And then if I think about go-to-market data writ large beyond just financial data, I think the whole C-suite needs to be interested in it. We all want great outcomes for our business, and it starts with the top line.
You talk about trust in the data, and I completely understand the concept because, I've seen so many times people look at a report and say, "This just doesn't make any sense," right? And then they just give up on the report, they give up on the data, they give up on that person. Um, why do you think, particularly in the go-to-market data, it's so difficult for so many companies to get high confidence data, to get the kind of hygiene and data integrity that that you often think about as part of the financial data, but you rarely think about that at the same level with the go to market data. Talk to us a little bit about that.
The good conversations around definitions continue. I think often go-to-market folks are focused on generating new leads, generating revenue, generating deals, generating customers. And the folks who are responsible for tracking a business in hindsight are often better equipped to document well. Those go-to-market functions might not be equipped to document well. And so without that documentation and common understanding, it goes awry very quickly. Trust is really easy to lose and hard to rebuild. And so if you find yourself in an early stage and you haven't lost trust, take the time to establish those common definitions so everybody knows what we're talking about when we say certain words. And then as you build that confidence together about speaking the same language, it'll enable, faster decisions, and then better follow-on decisions.
At what stage do you think moving from intuitive operations to data driven, or at least data driven augmentation of your thinking, right? When is that critical? And maybe it's not a stage issue, maybe it's a business complexity issue.
I think it is that business complexity issue. At the point that you're looking at a population that's not homogenous, it's not all the same, there are different attributes and you can segment it. You start to need to ask yourself questions about how do the different pieces look separately. I think that's when it gets real. If I was going to, just at some point, if you're looking at Excel and you can't fit it all on one page and it's data that's not legible, then it's time. At the point that you start building line charts and bar graphs and monitoring and KPIs, right then is the time.
A lot of people seem content to just report on what they're already measuring. I mean, we've seen in a lot of companies we go into, they've got a bunch of dashboards, a bunch of reports, particularly in the CRM. And part of their monthly management meeting is they look at all these things. But it almost becomes like this rote experience where they just go through them quickly and then move on to the next topic of the agenda because nothing has apparently been measured that seems actionable. Why do you think people sort of get into this state of laziness about what they're looking at, if you will? And maybe that's too derogatory, but you get my point.
I do get your point. A state of inertia, I'll call it. It's an object at rest. It's easier to stay at rest. I think the fast answer is it's easy. I know how to pull that data. I know the data definition. We understand what our target is in this area, and I'm achieving against that target. It's especially challenging to have the drive to continue to get better if you're having good or great business results. Because we're having good results. Like, why do we need to change?
Yeah.
Right? And the answer is because everything is changing around you all the time and you'll get left if you're not changing. But it's hard to maintain that sort of proactive stance in a place that's already successful.
It's interesting because on the other end of the spectrum, if you're challenged and struggling, my experience is people feel as if they need very short-term fixes. And typically if they don't have their data posture in order, that's not something that gets fixed overnight. They sort of get stuck, right? Which is, we don't have the time to fix all this stuff to give us the answers that we actually need to improve our business. Have you ever seen that play out?
In accounting, we talk about that information needs to be both timely and accurate. Um, and there are times that you sacrifice accuracy to get to timely. And being, ruthless in your prioritization of what's the most important KPI to measure. And it may necessitate that you stop measuring others for a while for the sake of focus. Um, and so having that question around, timeliness and accuracy is really important. And you're right, when you're in trouble, it's very hard to prioritize something that doesn't have um, often as instantaneous or clear ROI for the investment. But I would say that on the other hand, um, if you're a business in trouble or a business that has challenges or a business, that's just looking to grow faster and better and more, um, it seems a good investment to get to know your own business better, to create those actionable insights.
They had Kelly Ford, who I believe you know, on one of our podcasts, and she had mentioned that um, they actually value companies differently based on how mature they are on their data, right? Because she says that's an indication of execution risk. Companies that have good data sets, understand where their revenue's coming from, understand the levers that they can push, they value them, let's say 8x. Companies that don't, maybe they value it half of that because they view that it's sort of not just because they don't have the data, but because the leadership team hasn't prioritized that it's indicative of a less mature team, which adds risk. So I thought that was kind of an
Yeah,
interesting
I love
conversation.
that she made that so explicit. It's often implicit in those conversations as well as you try to facilitate an exit as a CFO. If you don't have great KPIs to talk about your business, it becomes much, much harder to sell.
Yeah, or just, when they ask for certain diligence requests, if it takes you 3 weeks of unnatural acts to actually produce it, it definitely raises eyebrows.
For sure.
So you talk, some about, the need for people to be curious about data. What do you mean when you say that?
Um, so there's both being curious about the data as it relates to the business that you're a part of. I think there's also an element of basic data education that I'd recommend people do. It's I've read books and certainly when I graduated some time ago from college, there was not a concentration in data analytics. It didn't exist. And so I've been forced to gain a working knowledge via experience. And you're never too old to read a textbook. My very favorite one is Information Dashboard Design by Stephen Few. And it's really, really basic. There's a lot you can do with a good line chart and a good bar graph
Yeah,
and
100%.
Excel. And so there's this element around data visualization and data that sounds really scary, but being curious about and taking time to educate yourself and have continuing education, I think is an important piece of that. And then taking that and bringing that curiosity and how to apply it to the business that you're in, I think is a recipe for success.
Do you think there's any, particular skill attribute or personality attribute, that is more indicative of people that are comfortable with data and curious with data?
You can gain a lot from interviewing someone and asking, "What are you curious about? What have you been interested to learn? What are you interested about in this business?" So someone who's innately curious as opposed to someone who have to make curious is always really helpful. And then there's a little bit of sheer grit and determination that, okay, that's the initial answer, but I want to go deeper. I want to know more. Revenue per customer. I wanna know, like, how does it look across our different but does it look different for different vintages? How's it growing over time? Um, if I split things apart different ways and I'm curious about the populations that I'm doing analysis on, that's really important.
It's pretty interesting. Um, let's talk a little bit about and you mentioned go-to-market, but let's talk about finance data versus go-to-market data. Do you view those as two different things?
Not really. Um, I don't view I don't view them as two different things. Certainly, there is some core finance data that is sort of the output of financial reporting that accounting handles, and go to market is tending to be likely more KPI driven, things associated with customer attributes. But go to market I think of as the precursor to a financial outcome and the financial data. So in some ways, many of the go to market KPIs are leading indicators, hopefully, for the financial outcomes and the financial KPIs that happen. So they're very, very linked together.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you, and I think we're seeing a trend for more CFOs to sort of embrace maybe not ownership, but at least responsibility for understanding the go-to-market data, since it basically, as you said, it is the early indicator of what the financials are going to look like some period after that.
That's
Do you think it requires, in order to make sure that the go-to-market data is sufficiently comprehensive and of sufficient hygiene, does it require a RevOps leader that's kind of on peer level with the other revenue leaders? What does it require in your mind organizationally? And the reason I ask is, we've seen so many functional leaders within the revenue teams, sales leaders, marketing leaders, CS leaders, you know, talk about wanting to be data driven, but not necessarily able to prioritize their own actions to ensure that the data posture is where it needs to be. And so I'm just interested in your views on how do we get past that?
I don't know that I have a bright line answer. I think from a size of company perspective, often RevOps and FP&A, it can be in the same group, perhaps both reporting through the CFO. If they're not, that's totally okay too. Sometimes RevOps reports up to the CRO, for instance, but they have to be connected. Because again, the financial indicators are the lagging indicator. The early indicators of go to market are the leading indicator, and you have to be tightly connected to have, I think of it as a feedback loop. We did this because we measured that. This was the outcome that happened. Let's go back and remeasure it again. Are we having the desired impact, or do we need to change something that we're doing actively? And so sometimes it's one group under the CFO. Um, Sometimes it's two groups under two leaders, but they have to be tightly coupled. I think
Yeah.
RevOps and finance have to be tightly coupled.
You mentioned earlier that you're earlier in your career, you were on the accounting and auditing side. Um, at what point did you start to, I guess, develop an interest or get some experience on, let's call it the FP&A side of finance?
On the FP&A side, I guess the story of my career, I spent 5 years in audit for KPMG. It was a great time, really loved it. Went and did consulting for a couple of years and then joined a payments company in 2008. After the payments company I was working for got purchased by a large public company, that's when I took on the forward-looking view. But the sort of, again, I moved from lagging into leading. Accounting is just the lag of finance as the lead. Finance is predicting, accounting is counting. They have to be tightly linked to each other. Um, and I think my education and experience in accounting allowed me to be a better finance leader. Um, Curiosity was really important, and it was a way that I was developing my career. And so going into responsibility for that, I had multiple years of experience collaborating with FP&A as a business partner in accounting. And so that collaboration to gain experience is the way that it moved. And the same was true of my data responsibilities. It started out in finance analytics and then grew more broad to support the business as a whole.
Okay. Interesting. I like, and I guess it's probably obvious to those of you that practice the craft, but I like the accounting is the lagging,
Yeah.
FP&A is the leading. And, we the collective investment world talks all the time about predictability of a business. Um, and much like FP&A is the leading to the finance, which is why FP&A groups do a lot of modeling and that
Mhm.
sort of stuff, right? Because it's models, just like in weather forecasting, are what allow you to have some predictability. Moving a little bit earlier, from a predictability perspective, suggests that you should have very good models of go to market. Um, and we often see that lacking. We see basically goals being handed down from on high, and what they call their plan or for the year is basically just slicing the goals into 4 quarters and saying, okay, how much is marketing responsible for, how much is sales responsible for, et cetera. And those aren't models, right? That they give you no there's no value for predictability, et cetera. Do you see that changing? Is it happening at your company? Do you see generally people starting to understand the importance of moving modeling, good modeling more into go to market and not just waiting till it's financial data?
Yeah, I see modeling. I mean, typically that's going to be a bottoms up modeling exercise. And what you were talking about being handed goals, I've been part of many of a tops down as well. And in real life, what happens is that you have tops down, you have bottoms up, and there's going to be an answer somewhere in the middle that's the right answer. And then you make goals together and revise it based on your experience and what actually happens in the business. And that should be, again, a conversation, because if there's a significant gap between your top-down expectations, which is often based in data like trend data, or market data, versus your bottoms-up view, which is an operational view of how you're generating the business as a whole, understanding that gap and how you change your activities based on that understanding is the magic between, accounting, finance, and running the business.
Yeah, and I guess in your business, in these payments businesses, it's sort of doubly important because your revenue, I believe, doesn't really come when you first get the customer. It comes when they start using or their customers start using the payments vehicle, and so it takes the concept of customer success to a whole new level because of the
Yes.
importance of adoption and expansion. And is that where you end up as a leadership team spending a lot of time trying to really understand how those motions are working in your organization?
I think in our organization, I think of us as a B to B to C, because we are enabling businesses to talk and have good conversations with their consumers. And so there's this element where we need to understand not only our own go to market motion on a B2B, from a B2B point of view, but also how the end consumers that the businesses our customers are serving, how they are, reacting to the communication. We happen to facilitate generally text messages. And so how consumers react to that is very important for understanding our relationship with our customers over time.
And do you grab that understanding from the way you've instrumented your platform, or are you dependent on having your customers give you certain information?
We can certainly, it's a little bit of both. There's good conversations we need to have with our customers about what they believe they see in the platform. We certainly have instrumentation that allows us to see how, deliverability and other measures of sort of effectiveness of the communication to the consumer. So it's a little bit of both. It's a conversation, and I would say it's evolving over time. Um, we're a growth stage business, and as we grow and scale up, our experience and understanding of those trends will deepen.
One more question for you, Beth, and thanks again for spending time with me. Um, if you look forward, and I imagine in your role, like many roles, we're all going, this AI thing seems exciting and scary all at the same time. What are you imagining kind of the CFO role looks like in the next 5 years, just in general, and then also um, if you have any point of view of the impact of AI specifically on the work to be done by finance organizations?
This question gives me a little bit of a laugh because I spend zero time thinking about how the role of the CFO is going to change. I am very, very focused on delivering great results and outcomes for the business and the team I support. So I don't spend a lot of time on that. But I think if I imagine AI and data analysis more and more, we're all going to need to be conversant in these topics. Um, and so education, continuing to be open to learning and curious, is going to be really important. And like, try it out. I happen to have through work and access to Copilot, and I love even some of the really basic things that are happening. Taking meeting notes and delivering action items. It's enabling me to be fully present in a meeting where
Yeah.
perhaps I needed to be also taking notes to the side before. I love that,
Yeah.
and so there's this element of it's. Of course, big data and AI and machine learning and all of that is going to have great impact on sort of what we do with data and the outcomes that we drive. But there's also how it impacts our day-to-day work. And some of those basic functions are really important. If even if I rewind, 10 years and think about my work in accounting, specifically doing accounting research at the time required probably subscription to one of, the Big Four's libraries and experience writing memos, probably a connection to an audit partner and doing some technical analysis. You can get a basic answer through, Chat GPT or Copilot much, much more quickly. And so it's going to be, I think, less and less about core business knowledge and more about being willing to learn and expand your skill set.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Well, that's all I've got. I appreciate you joining us, Beth. I think there's some very interesting morsels of information and ideas. I particularly like sort of the stream around curiosity. I think that's a big thing that probably isn't spoken about enough, and I think that would be helpful in many organizations to see more curiosity around data. So again, thank you for being with us.
You're so welcome. On that point about curiosity, if I'm giving advice to folks who are listening to the podcast, be curious to the point of being annoying. Ask why. Be the annoying 4-year-old that is asking why 6 times to the question, well, why that? Why this? Be curious.
That's interesting. Just on a side note, that because that reminds me of my daughter, who is an exceptionally good student, and part of the reason is that she just asks a million questions because she really wants to learn, right? But do you believe that have people told you that you're being irritating or annoying at some point, or
I
is
don't know
it
that
you
it's
just
irritating or
imagine that?
annoying. It's why are we still spending time on defining this? Is it not? And like, it's because we'll get to the right answer faster. Hang with me while we be curious, define it, and really dig in for a minute.
That's very cool. Interesting. Thanks again.
You're so welcome, Scott. It's been great.
Make no mistake, good data matters for driving efficient growth and valuations. Follow me on LinkedIn, where I'm sharing insights from CFOs, investors, and strategic go-to-market execs. Thanks for listening to The Data Room.